7:30 now at KPEL, and as we've been talking, taking your calls this morning, really at the budget crisis that faces our state. Last night on KPEL, Governor Bel Edwards addressed the state on what will happen if we don't shore up what is almost $1 billion budget shortfall. He joins us on the phone. Good morning, Governor Bel Edwards. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you. I'm doing fine, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you and your listeners this morning.
Well, we appreciate you doing that, the statewide broadcast, and then making yourself available this morning. You mentioned a lot. Boy, there was so much to get through last night. I'm sure it was probably something you didn't expect to do right away after being elected governor. You did talk a lot about what you were going to do on the cutting side and on the revenue side. So let's talk with the cutting side. The things that I was able to catch there, and obviously you correct me if I'm wrong. You said, you know what, we need a hiring freeze. We need a reduction in state contracts. We need to take $120 million from the rainy day fund. We need to make $160 million in cuts to state spending. And we need to use $200 million from the non-coastal BP payments. So am I on target there? And how will these cuts work, and where do you see these cuts happening, sir?
Well, the cuts, first of all, your summary is very accurate, and that adds up. All of those things together add up to about $488 million.
Okay.
So that's more than half of the current mid-year shortfall is in non-revenue raising measures. But the cuts are spread throughout the budget. There's practically no area of state government that won't have to participate in that $160 million in cuts. And those cuts are substantial because they come with only 3 months left in the session in the year. And so if you annualize those cuts, you get an appreciation for just how significant they are. But I believe a balanced approach is what's necessary. We have to have the right balance between spending cuts and revenue, both of which have to be strategic in order to fix this problem.
I think people understand that it does. We have to raise revenue. I think anybody who thinks we can't, that we can get out of this without raising taxes somewhat, I think they're just deluding themselves. But I would like to know, State Treasurer John Kennedy has made a lot about over the months and years about state contracts. That's one of the things you talked about, reducing state contracts. Is it, in your mind, will it ever be as significant as perhaps the state treasurer would want?
No.
And is that actually logical, or?
Well, it's logical to achieve the savings where you can.
Okay.
And the contracts are somewhere where we've been looking. We've been doing that since I came into office, and that's going to continue. And I've instructed Jay Darden, the Commissioner of Administration, to take a comprehensive look and figure out where we can save on those contracts, either by eliminating some or by reducing how much we're paying for others. And by the way, it's also in the call. So in the legislative session that's going to start Sunday, I put it in there so that the legislature can take a look at those as well. And I have, over my years as a legislator, voted for legislation that was directed towards contracts so that we could put them on the table and take a good look and see what kind of savings can be realized. So I think it's the right thing to do. Where the treasurer is wrong is when he suggests that the entire problem can be fixed there. And I would just point out the fact that for 8 years we had a conservative Republican governor. We had a conservative legislature. If the problems could have been fixed as easily as simply cutting those contracts, that would have happened already, and they wouldn't have incorporated all of that one-time money and resorted to all those gimmicks to try to keep going along from year to year. So while there's some savings there, the idea that we can solve our problems in a painless way that's fanciful, and it's not reality.
So if we were to take a look at the state budget, if I had this hypothetical pie chart in front of me with where the major spending is, we talk a lot about higher ed, we talk a lot about health care. Do those represent, do either one of those, or what is the major chunk? Are we talking about something that's 30% of the budget that we have to get rid of? Or is all these things we're talking about like 5%? Is it even worth the hubbub that it's causing with the cuts?
Well, first of all, the cuts we're talking about are substantial, and we're gonna be challenged delivering basic state services even with the cuts that I'm proposing. But without new revenue, I can tell you it will be impossible to deliver basic and essential state services that everybody expects the state to do, and that's why we are in a pickle. You know, I want to remind you and your listeners, this is the largest budget deficit in the history of our state. It's $940 million in the current year that ends June 30th, and it's $2 billion next year. And it is the 8th straight year of revenue shortfall. So all the easy things were done years ago, the easy cuts, the ways to achieve savings and efficiencies, that stuff has been done. We're in a very difficult place, and the solutions have to be equal to the task. And that's why we're talking about major spending cuts and some revenue raising as well.
Well, let's talk about
but to get back to the question, what we need to understand is that while we have about $9 billion in state general fund in the budget, $3 billion of that is relatively unrestricted, and 80% of that $3 billion is health care and higher ed. And that's why typically when you have cuts, somewhere in the neighborhood of 80% of the cuts get allocated to health care and higher ed, because those are the big ticket spending items that are undedicated. And we have to free up a bigger portion of the budget, but a lot of that takes constitutional amendments. Well, you can't do that in the first month in office. So we're working within the constraints of the state government as it is under the law. And now we are trying to avoid those horrific cuts to health care and higher ed, but without new revenue, on top of the things that you mentioned at the outset of the program, those cuts are going to be, in my view, catastrophic.
All right, let's talk about the ideas for raising revenue. You would like to see an increase in the alcohol and tobacco taxes. You'd like to see some of the tax breaks for some of the corporate folks cut, and you'd like to see a 1 penny sales tax increase. Am I close there on my assessment?
Well, no, you're right. And by the way, there are some other proposals as well. And many of the proposals that we have are best practices. They're things that we should do regardless, because there are always changes that need to be made to update and modernize the tax code so that you have a revenue stream that is predictable and stable over time. And so there's some other things. But the single biggest component is a new penny of sales tax. It's what we call a clean penny, because the vast majority of exemptions would not apply to that penny, and so it would bring in more revenue, but it would still be protected with respect to groceries, food for home consumption, whether and residential utilities and pharmaceutical drugs. That the sales tax would not apply to those areas.
Those are always protected, yes, sir.
Yeah, those protections are in the Constitution, and so certainly we would not mess with that at all. But it is a critical component. We also know that there's some room in terms of where the Southern average is on alcohol and tobacco. That there's room for increases there to get closer to the Southern average and pick up some additional revenue.
All right. Now, Governor, you've talked about the reductions. You've talked about how these revenue increases. The idea of putting these things in the call and that different part, you got 3 weeks to make some of this happen. All right, let's talk about the political side of it, because you talked about that last night. You know, legislators, and you were part of the or have been part of the legislature. You were from 2008 and thus forward. It's in there a time where, during that span of time, there was a governor. Did he just not provide leadership? I mean, I know he took one-time money. We all know he took a bunch of one-time money and tried to fill holes on recurring expenses, and there was just no political will. Do you think you are the governor to make the Democrats, the Republicans, and get rid of their party titles, make them actually sit down in a room, work together, get as many cuts as are possible and reasonable, and as few tax revenue increases as we can possibly, get without killing ourselves or business? Are you the guy to get these guys in the area and have them actually get it done, or is it just going to be the debate between Republicans and Democrats again?
Well, if it devolves into a partisan battle, then we all lose.
Yeah.
And I am committed to being the leader who works in good faith, honestly, and as hard as I can to bring everybody together, put the solutions on the table, and find out between the appropriate and necessary spending cuts and the appropriate and necessary revenue-raising measures, how we achieve the right balance to deliver the state services that the people are counting on. And for 8 years, it was too much one-time money in the budget, and that money is gone now. It was too many new tax breaks that we could not afford. And it was this idea that you could privatize things and always achieve a savings. Look, we have 30,000 fewer state employees today than we did 8 years ago. But where was the savings that was supposed to come from that? And so we've had irresponsible budgeting practices for too long. I think we had a governor who was more worried about running for president than governing Louisiana. He refused to make the hard decisions, so he neither made the necessary cuts nor did he raise the revenue in order to have things in balance. And so that's where we are today. And I am committed to fixing the situation, but it's tough. It's hard. There's nothing easy about it. This is not where I wanted to be a month after being sworn in as governor. Nobody wants to be here. But at the end of the day, I am the governor. And I intend to fix the problem, and I intend to serve the people of Louisiana well. They deserve more, and they are demanding more from us as leaders in Baton Rouge, and we have to get the job done.
All right, and leadership starts from the top down. What are you doing in your office? What are you doing with salaries? What are you doing? Like, for example, I know you took awful lot of flack about Jay Darden getting the $33,000 extra to work as Commissioner of Administration. I know you, and I know your reputation for leadership, and I know it does start at the top. So what are you doing to make it all a reality so these legislators can look at you and say, hey, I am doing it?
Well, first of all, the governor's office will operate on hundreds of thousands of dollars less in my first year than in Governor Jindal's last year.
That's great.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars less. There are other salaries that were cut by as much as $70,000. I am proud of the team that I have assembled. I can defend the salaries that we are paying, and in the aggregate, we are going to save hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I think it's important to lead by example. There are also positions that I'm not filling.
Right.
And so all of those things together, and on top of that, we are not going out of the governor's office to be filing all of the frivolous litigation and issuing these tremendous contracts to lawyers that were costing hundreds of thousands of dollars either, not when we have an attorney general's office that is supposed to be doing those things also. So there's a lot of things we're going to do out of the governor's office to lead by example. These are tough times, and we're going to get it done, and we're going to lead by example, and we're going to work across the aisle with everyone in order to come up with the right balance to serve the people.
I know Rob wants to ask about TOPS because, the university's got that notice yesterday, and then people really got confused. Rob, what did you want to ask Governor?
Look, really, this has been by far the most overwhelming, topic that we've gotten comments about, even though it seems as if the decision was made on the TOPS level, their office, in anticipation of your address that you made last night. I just have to ask, not as the governor, but as the husband of an educator and as a dad, what do you say to, those students who feel like they've worked so hard to, have all the qualifications to receive TOPS to not get it because of really irresponsible state spending?
Well, first of all, it's a function not just of the spending, but it's also a function of the revenue. We're $570 million short in revenue in the current year.
So
we're $2 billion short next year. So it is not just spending; it is also the revenue. Side. But let me clear up a few things.
Yeah. Talk to us about TOPS.
The funding for the TOPS program was short in this year's budget because the number of students on TOPS was underestimated.
Yeah, I figured.
If we have a deficit situation, there cannot be a supplemental appropriation to fill that shortfall. And so that $28 million is not going to be funded if we don't have enough new revenue to overcome that shortfall. Now, in that situation, the universities are going to absorb the cost in the current semester. So it's not as if people who are in college today on a top scholarship are going to receive a tuition bill in the current semester. That's not going to happen.
It'll be the next semester.
But the $28 million will be absorbed by the universities in addition to whatever other cut comes their way. And under the best of circumstances, it appears to me that the mid-year cut in total for higher education will be the largest mid-year cut in the history of our state. And this comes on top of 8 years where the state of Louisiana has disinvested in higher education more than any other state in the nation. Now, with respect to going forward, that is where we need additional revenue as well. If we were short $2 billion in state general fund, cuts are painful. And I have a child on TOPS. I'm married to an educator. I understand. And this is not where I want to go. But at the same time, I am constitutionally obligated to have a balanced budget. If we're $2 billion short on state general fund, I don't know how in the world that we're going to be able to fund the general fund component of the TOPS program. And that's just the fact of the matter. And I call upon people to work with me. Let's fix the problem. I very much believe that those kids had an expectation that they were going to qualify for TOPS and they were going to get the full benefit of that as they were in technical colleges or community colleges or in our universities. But, we have a lot of other folks out there that need health care, that we need to support the general fund component of our higher education institutions. We've got K through 12 schools to run. We have to house inmates. We have to do all sorts of things. This is what happens when you have the largest budget deficit in the history of your state. If you don't enact meaningful and appropriate spending cuts and revenue increases, then you cannot shield these programs from cuts.
Governor John Bel Edwards is joining us this morning, and thank you again so much for your time this morning. I would like to go back to and talk a little bit about, the situation. We know it's a dire situation. You have, also tackled the fact that we can't just reduce every state contract. We kind of pointed that out. If my memory serves me correctly, but please correct me if I am wrong. In the legislature, somewhere within the last 5 or 6 years, didn't the legislature pass a measure that does allow up to 5% or up to 10% over a certain period of time to cut in each department? Am I getting near where I'm trying to go here, sir?
Well, yes, and as best I can figure out what you're trying to say, that is going to be triggered on Saturday for me.
Okay.
The Revenue Estimating Conference met on Wednesday, and they recognized a reduced amount of revenue for the current year and for next year. And that amount for the current year is $570 million less than was anticipated when the budget year started. On Saturday, tomorrow, the Joint Legislative Committee on the Budget is going to meet. And when they do, they will notify me that there is a deficit. That then triggers my obligation to take certain steps, some of which I do unilaterally, some of which I do with JLCB approval, and some of which is going to require approval of the entire legislature in this session.
Right.
And so we will work all the way through that, and that's when we are going to make the cuts, and that's part of the $160 million in cuts that I've been talking about.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you, because people were referencing the 5%. Across the board state cuts, because they remember that from the legislative sessions.
Yeah, that is part of what we're going to be doing.
Okay. I'm so glad you answered that too, because that, releases for people that tension that they felt. And again, we have so many issues. And one of the big things you said last night that's very important, not enough people talk to their legislators about what they want, what they don't want, give them, an expression of, hey, don't do this or do this. I know you encourage that highly. Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think people are going to be engaged enough to actually get in with this process now?
Well, I've been traveling the state extensively, talking to various groups all over. And I know that they have been exchanging ideas with me. I have been listening to them. I have been sharing with them what I thought we needed to do. I would hope and expect that's happening with the legislators as well. And you know, having been a legislator for 8 years, I can tell you it typically does happen. And you know, we just need to understand how serious this situation is. Nobody can get everything that they want.
Right.
But we got to come together, find enough common ground to fix our problems, and put ourselves on a stable footing. We have to stabilize this budget. We can't keep doing this year to year, where we're going to have revenue shortfalls and then mid-year cuts as well. It just doesn't work. And we've got to stop pretending that things are better than they are, and we have to accept the reality of the situation and move forward.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It seems like, you know, we need to go back to, you know, why do we do it with the Revenue Estimating Conference? Why was the government set up that way? And can we not, as you're saying, go back and change some of those basics so we don't have the same situation every year, and especially depending on the amount of a barrel of oil?
Well, actually, the Revenue Estimating Conference came about as a way to fix what was a problem, bigger problem before,
right?
that.
Yeah, I know. It's like, boy, in Louisiana, man, we just shoot ourselves in the foot, you know, back and forth and 2 ways to Sunday.
Yeah, that's right. But look, overall, the Revenue Estimating Conference does an important job because it's an outside entity composed of economists and experts, and then they tell us what we should reasonably expect to have in the way of revenue, and then that's what we plug into the budget. Before that, the governors and the legislatures just kind of picked a number out of the air, and that didn't work very well.
No, obviously.
And so this is an improvement, not that it can't be further refined, but it is a big improvement over where we were 30 years ago.
You know, these streamlining commissions we've had over the years, there's always been a lot of talk about that. Are we doing some of those recommendations? How come we're not doing more? If we paid for those studies, how come we're not implementing more of those changes, Governor?
Well, first of all, anytime you streamline, you know, you still have to get that through the legislature. But I want you to consider the things that we have done that were all supposed to save money. We have 30,000 fewer state employees than we had 8 years ago. We have reformed the way we deliver Medicaid services with a capitated program with 5 MCOs, 5 insurance companies. That was supposed to save us money. We have privatized so much, including our safety net hospital system. That was supposed to save us money. And so many of the things that the streamlining folks have pushed have actually been done. But they don't always, in fact, in the instances I just gave you, I don't believe that we can demonstrate any savings. Now, we may be getting better services than we would have otherwise, and that's questionable too. But certainly we cannot demonstrate any savings. And so there is just a certain basic cost to the delivery of services that everybody wants. And you know, we have to find a way with a balanced approach through cuts and revenue to make sure that the essential services remain in place. And I'm committed to doing that. And I know that it's hard. You know, this is again not where I wanted to be a month into my first term as governor.
Yeah,
but
sure.
It's where we are.
Sir, let me ask you one final question, and then I know we have to wrap up because you have graciously gone over time with us, and we so appreciate that. And the question is about Medicaid. I got a lot of folks in the healthcare industry that just they get so doggone frustrated that people will come in and want basic services from emergency room in the hospital, or they will call an ambulance for frivolous things. Because, you know, in reality, it's, I really need a pregnancy test, but I'm going to complain about something else. Governor, is there nothing we can do to reform the problems and the out-and-out just wasteful spending that does go on in some parts of Medicaid? Now, we know other people are using it for good means, and they're getting help, but golly, I mean, these ambulance calls that we hear about and these trips to emergency rooms because you think you have a sore throat. I mean, that costs so much more money than it should.
Well, you make a good point, and the vast majority of that abuse is happening with people who have no insurance at all.
Absolutely.
If you have Medicaid, you have access to primary care physicians. But if you're uninsured right now, the only place that you oftentimes know where you can get care is in an emergency room.
Right.
Now,
so
one of the ways that we can fix that.
Yeah, well, how do we fix it?
Well, one of the ways you fix it is you take advantage of the Medicaid expansion, and those people have a Medicaid card, so they have access to primary care physicians. You then institute copays so that if they go to the emergency room, they're going to pay out of their pocket. But if they go to their primary care physicians, they don't pay out of their pocket.
And is that something the legislature you think will be willing to do? Because I know it's been a very big political football before. Because you know what? If I do it, on my own insurance, if I go into that emergency room and it's not an emergency, I'm going to be footing that bill. Can you get us some copays?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if people actually have skin in the game, then they won't. Maybe they won't abuse the system.
You can change behavior. You can save money. But it's also more important than that. You can actually deliver better health care. You cannot manage people's health through the emergency room.
Yeah.
So if we have too many people relying on the emergency room for basic health care, it is the most expensive way to deliver it and the least effective way to manage health and produce better health outcomes. And so we can do that by instituting copays at the emergency room that will drive these people instead to their primary care physicians, and everybody is better off. The state saves money. They're going to have better health, and the hospitals will be better off as well.
And do they get they need a penalty, though, don't you think, if they don't go to their primary person for something ridiculous?
The penalty is going to be the copay.
Okay.
Because the copay is going to be higher at the hospital, and they can avoid that if they go to the primary care physician.
They just go to the primary care, yeah.
That's right. And in the population that we're talking about, an $8 copay at the emergency room is all that you need to change behavior. Mm-hmm. And we are going to do that. That is an integral part of our plan.
Sir, I have to thank you so very much, both from Rob and I and the folks listening. Whether people agree or disagree with you, you have been here with this conversation. You did your statewide address last night, and I have to tell you how refreshing it is to have an actual conversation with the governor. We got booted out about 3 or 4 years ago, and even before then, we didn't have conversations. The governor before then, and I'm not picking, I'm just saying that he would talk at me or at people. There was not a back and forth, and I really appreciate, whether people agree or disagree with you, that you at least give us the opportunity and that you are a back and forth gentleman who will give conversation with us. I think it's very desperately important to the people in our area.
Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed my time with you and your listeners this morning, and I am calling upon everybody in Louisiana to come together. Let's shed our party labels, sit down and work this out, and make this a state that we all want it to be, not just for ourselves, but more importantly for our kids and grandkids.
Governor John Bel Edwards, sir, thank you very much for your time this morning. We do very much appreciate it, and we hope you have a good weekend, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. All right, see, I think we had whether you like it or you dislike it, you agree or disagree, we had a back-and-forth conversation to ask. Now, he is saying we'll do a hiring freeze. We will try to reduce some state contracts. We'll get $160 million in cuts in state spending. We'll take $120 million from the rainy day fund, but he still is suggesting the penny sales tax, an increase in alcohol and tobacco taxes, and more tax breaks, corporate tax breaks.
We'll keep an eye on it and post this whole interview later on this morning at kpel965.com. Coming up, Fox News, and in the 8 o'clock hour, State Treasurer John Kennedy. It's News Talk 96.5 KPEL.